All right, good afternoon, folks. Let's get started with governance. Ms. Sizemore Heiser has requested to be virtual today due to personal reasons, as she's currently located in California. All those in favor of granting Ms. Sizemore Heiser's request? That's Ms. Marin, Dr. Anderson, and myself. Therefore, it's approved. Ms. Dixit has Ms. Sizemore Heiser. Ms. Dixit has requested to be virtual today due to personal reasons, as she has a conflict due to a work commitment, is currently located in Centerville, Virginia. All those in favor of granting Ms. Dixit request? Same three folks. So Ms. Dixit and Ms. Sizemore Heiser can participate virtually. Ladies, can you test your mics?
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Seema, that works. Ms. Sizemore Heiser, are you here? All right, we'll wait for her to join us. Okay, so we received, thank you, Dr. Presidio, for answers to a lot of the questions we put forward from the last meeting. But and this is something I communicated with my fellow board members on the committee here, which is I think that a lot of our questions were in operations and not at the macro level where policy should be. And so while we have those available to us as reference, what I would like to do in today's meeting is really twofold. I'm a cut to the chase kind of person. I took a stab at creating a new policy, which is what has been handed out to each of you. And it will be coming around to Dr. Reed here in a moment. I got an extra copy. Yeah. So I have the current policy in front of me on my computer because part of what's on the agenda is, what is still relevant, what might be missing, should this be moved to instructional services? I sort of in my draft took a stab at it and threw it in instructional services, but I also read through, and maybe you all have done this as well, most of the regulations and policies that sort of intertwine with this particular one. For example, there's one on homework that is like really, really brief. Not sure if that should be addressed in this policy. I think that there are other regulations, and that's the question. Is this just a secondary policy? Should this be an all policy, all schools that has a secondary and elementary section to it? I can tell you as a former employee, but also just as a parent or constituent, it's very hard to know that we have like 5 or 6 different policies related to grading. I think it would be better serve our community if everything could be found in one place, if in fact it can belong in one document. So I wanted to give everyone a second to kind of review what I put together. If you want to take a look at that and make some notes on it, it could perhaps launch us into conversation. Seema, let me, hey, Wendy, can you send it to Seema and Rachna? Yes. Or I can, maybe more quickly.
Yeah, thanks. I was just about to ask.
Yeah, sorry. You got it, Wendy? I will get it. I might beat you to it. All right, I'm logged in. Okay. I got it. And again, this is just to start discussion. I felt like, I wanted to take a stab at it. Let me make sure I'm sending the correct one. I played with several of my own little drafts. Yes.
So yeah, I just have sort of a format question for our discussion today. So you had also sent us like 3 guiding questions to consider. What is still relevant,
Right.
What might be missing, and then another piece. And now we've got this great draft. So how do you want us to go through things?
I would say if you have the original policy, which my apologies, I didn't print it again, in front of you, which I have in front of me, I would almost look at the 2 of them and pose these questions to both, right? Technically they were designed for the old policy, but after I put the agenda together, I decided to kind of go through myself and say, take a stab at sort of revising based on conversations that we've had. but also understanding, I do not personally think that we should get into operations at all. You know, we worked hard as a board to move boundaries away from the board to the system, and I don't want to now take grading from the system and put it on the board. Dr. Anderson.
Just kind of along the lines of what Melanie just asked, I just want to structure how we're going to go through this. Is it your intent that we go through the draft that you've given us or some of the other things? I just want to organize myself a little bit.
If you want to go along with the agenda, again, I created the draft after I submitted the agenda. But if you want to,
Totally open, just let me know what you want to do.
so I personally am okay with the current policy in front of me and then my draft, and sort of working through those same three questions.
Robin, can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you say current policy, there's two different grading policies posted on board docs. I want to make sure we're talking about the same one when there's
20
policy 2430, I guess that's regulation, I apologize. So you're talking about policy 2418, right?
Yes,
You're not talking-
policy 2418.
Right.
All right, I want to make sure I'm on the same page as you are. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to jump in if that works. First of all, thank you for outlining what you've done, because I think I did something very similar that I was going to bring here. I think we do need to organize our purpose. I also tried to look at some of the other policies. They seem to be consistently inconsistent in terms of titling. I think outside of purpose, everything else seems to be fast and loose. And I took a look at probably about a dozen or so. Some have a belief section, some have a philosophy section, and some don't. So I wasn't married to necessarily what it was titled, but that it was titled. What I see that is missing from the draft that you've sent is a definitions component, because I think some of the definitions, this is a communication to not just the superintendent, this is a communication to the public as well, because they do look at our policies to determine what should be happening. And this is a space where I think I want to push back a little bit in terms of what's operations, what's not, because essentially, all of our policies guide operations. So we live in that world. It's how we articulate it, I think, is the crux. So I would love to see, and I'm trying to find my cheat sheet here. I would like to see an operations, oh, here it is. I'm sorry, definitions be listed here. I would also, I'm very much in favor of the grading principles, but I wonder if we could have a separate discussion about that. Just, do we all agree that these are good principles? I know I feel pretty strongly that they are worthwhile, but I knew that there were some other issues. One of the things that I don't see
Just to
here.
clarify, you're referencing in the final report, page
Yes,
6?
there
the
were
guiding
seven
guiding
guiding
principles.
principles,
Okay,
yes.
I have that out.
So I would like that to be embedded in here somewhere. And I would also like to have a beliefs section. And again, this shows up in some policies and it does not show up in others, because I think that encapsulates what the board believes the grading and assessment, what the purpose should serve. It's a little bit more detailed than the purpose as it's outlined, because the policies that I looked at that had the belief section also had the purpose section. I also fully agree with you, because I pulled the other documents, and also I think Ms. Marin was very helpful in collating those, where we have policy 3205, which is the homework one. We have the one which is 2460, which is graduation. I really think I see a space for us to collapse most of this into one policy, so it's kind of a one-stop shop. So I will pause here for right now.
Thank you for those comments. Ms. Marin?
Yeah, thanks. I did organize my thoughts around your three guiding questions and also around the discussion last time, especially those 6 factors from the grading committee's report. And I do think it's worth responding to them. So, and I think the layout you've got here, Ms. Lady, is a nice start. You know, I think there's more specificity, though, that I've heard us all talk about that we'd want in here, and more directive about the consistency. So I do think that it's it's important to talk about high school credit-bearing classes because that's what we have been talking all along. But can we like make a parking lot of other related questions, like should the policy, like maybe this iteration of the policy is the credit-bearing because that's what the committee was focused on, but maybe the next iteration is, do we need to, how are we going to work in the homework policy? Should it be part of this or should it be updated in tandem? Should we have a clear policy for the elementary, because we do have report cards for that too. So I think those could be two things that we put a pin in. Regarding the 6 topics, I did think I do want us to put those topics into the policy. So the grade book type, whether that's, we can say it needs to be determined. We don't have to say it is quarterly or rolling, but that's what I thought we were talking about, is saying there needs to be a grade book type that is consistent.
If I can ask, just
Yeah.
because of the reports that we received and all of the legwork that's been done, are you saying that has to be consistent across every school or consistent within a school?
Well, when I look at the focus group data, there was variation on, but again, I think that's an operational thing, kind of. What I hear consistently from people is that it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent across schools, even course to course, and it's across the whole division. And I thought we were all, in tune with making it consistent. What I think is, this is really at the heart of that summative formative piece, so do we need to state that here? I mean, I think we should put summative formative in. There's some things that could go in here that could be open-ended, but some of it needs to be like, we're going to have one gradebook system, and it could be figured out in regulation, but it's going to be one system. I mean, relatedly, I don't agree with putting 2 different grading scales
Well, I'm
in
not
there.
putting 2. I was suggesting personally, we just go to A, B, C, D, E, F, but I figure I would lose that battle.
Well,
So at a minimum, I wanted to get rid of the D minus because I think that's the oddest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, so going through the grading committees, the rest of the things, the grade book weighting, so that was really the summative formative piece, sorry. I tied those 2 together. The minimum number of assignments, I don't have a strong opinion on that. The reassessment, yes, but we need to talk about late assessments, and is there a floor, is there a ceiling? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that comes out, but so what does the policy say? Because right now it doesn't say anything, so we can say, late assessments or reassessments will be provided, but it can't be, left up to, given the opportunity, and they must demonstrate genuine effort. I mean, we need like hard, cold, these are the parameters, and not interpretation at the level. Like I was wondering, could it be if students received an 80 or lower, they could reassess up to the full point value? Because what I read from the focus group input was, why would you cap a student's ultimate ability to get the highest grade? That's not motivating. But what if what if students want to retake it? They already have a 90 or a 95, and then it's just creating a lot more work for teachers. So what if we say like 80 is, if you get an 80 or lower, then you can retake, or maybe that's a lower grade even, I don't know, but that seems to get to some of that. So we could talk about that. The use of letter grades, yes, and that's already, and what I had said was the regulation shall stipulate one uniform grading scale for use in all credit-bearing classes across the school division, because who knows, maybe in the future, we have a superintendent in a situation who wants to change the grading scale. So yes, we could, I think these are like the higher level decisions. Do we want to say there should be a grading scale, figure it out in the reg? Or do we want to put the grading scale and then the reg further goes into it? The use of the 0, that seems to need discussion. And then I'm talking a lot, there's a whole bunch of other things, but yes, I think it should be moved to instructional services. That opens a whole category of conversations about, we're removing the term graduation requirements, promotion, and retention from this policy. And from what I can tell, those are not spoken to except for graduation requirements. There's nowhere else that talks about promotion or retention in our policies.
Correct.
So again, is that a parking lot thing?
Those are operationalized in regulations, but it's not spoken to in policy, because I studied it all
Well,
myself.
So these are things that I think we need to have more conversations on. And I've got some, and pass-fail, we have a policy on pass-fail.
We have a regulation.
No, it's a policy.
I couldn't.
Policy 2436. So there are 2 policies regarding grading. 2436 is pass-fail, and 3205 is homework. So again, can we identify some big questions that we have to answer now, in the near future? And if what we decide to make now, how does that impact pass-fail and impact homework? Because homework is part of the formative.
Yep.
So it seems like we have to talk about these two other policies.
There's 4 in total.
So,
Yeah, I thought I printed everything, but I missed the actual policy on pass-fail, so that's on me. So again, I don't see their hands up yet.
Yeah, I have my hand.
Oh, okay. Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
Thank you, and I'm really glad. First, can you guys hear me? Ms. Marin, I see you waving your hand. I wasn't sure if you could hear me or not.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. At first, I agree with both Ms. Marin and Dr. Anderson. I don't think this should be operational. I don't think we should be prescribing, 70-30 split or things like that. I do think we need to really think about the philosophy of grading. I'm just glancing at this that you sent, Ms. Lady, and I really appreciate you taking a stab at this, but I think we kind of need to peel the onion back a little bit, right? Like, to Ms. Marin's point, the title of this policy covers a lot of areas that aren't embedded in this policy. So my recommendation first would be to look at the title of this policy, create section headers for each of these sections, and then create additional section headers for the other 2 or maybe more policies that are grading related, the pass-fail, right? And kind of embed it all in one policy with different sections that address all these. So people aren't then, right, looking all over the place for different policies. That's the first suggestion I'd make. As far as the guiding principles, I think they're good, but they seem more almost like a list of tasks than really a philosophy of grading. So I would almost recommend we have a purpose, right, which is more the philosophy of grading. I like what you have here as a good start, but to me, this is really about what's really written here is a transparent process for reporting student progress, as opposed to, I would like to have a philosophy of what are we looking for around assessing student process, right? Again, I don't want to get operational, but I do think we need to decide, are we just assessing mastery? Are we assessing mastery and skills? Are we looking for skills and mastery that lead to good long-term outcomes, or just passing that class that year? Do we have different assessment philosophies for different types of classes? For example, arts versus academic classes. I think there's sort of a philosophy section that will then guide the operations of grading. That I think is what's causing some of the inconsistencies. Is there's been a disconnect in philosophy from school to school, or an inconsistent. So that's the first thing I'd recommend. And you can have the guiding principles kind of underneath that. Like, here's our philosophy and purpose. Here's our guiding principles. And then we can go through each section, right? You could talk about, go back to I've got the other one pulled up here. Talk about promotion, retention, grading, and graduation as different sections, and then add pass, fail, and homework. I'll wait till you guys start speaking. Can you pause my time, please?
It's paused. You're good.
All right, I just wanted to, it's just hard when I can kind of hear it, so.
Go ahead, Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
Thank you. So that's my first suggestion. As far as the recommendations, I do think we need to give some guidance. For example, on gradebook type, I think we need to give some guidance as to whether we are going to allow for 2 different gradebooks or the same. I think we need to give some guidance as to whether we're going to allow, whether we want weighting that's weighted more towards one category or more balanced. I think that's some guidance we can give. Number of assignments, I think we need to get some guidance in terms of overburdening students and staff, so they're not creating assignments, but also giving enough assignments to allow students to demonstrate mastery and not be so reliant on one assignment to determining their grade. Same with reassessment. I think, Ms. Marin, you mentioned something about, are we going to bound it? I think we need to bound it. I'm hearing from a lot of folks about the concerns of reassessments for the whole year, and that's also tied to what kind of grade book we do. So I think philosophies around that, same with letter grades. I think I'd be interested, Ms. Lady, to find out why you want to get rid of the D-, just out of curiosity, because I don't have a strong feeling, but I wonder if that level of detail is operational.
Well, it's interesting, the actual regulation currently on grade point averages only has a D. So the regulation was not rewritten, so if you get a D minus, it still goes in as a 1.0 into the grade point average. I just find it sort of like, come on, a D, isn't a D bad enough? We got to throw a D minus at a kid? I don't know, I mean, I did look at other school systems, and it's maybe Arlington that does a D minus. When I talk to my friends on the college side of the desk, they're just like, what's with the D minus? So I'm just sharing my truth.
No, I'm not judging. I'm just I just didn't know really why. And I did, again, it's that hard balance, right? If we're going to start talking about D minuses and things, I wonder if that's crossing into operational versus if we say letter grades, whole grades. I don't know how we would say it, but I think giving some guidance around that would make sense. And same with the use of the zero, putting the guidance that we need to have a reasonable attempt, and the operations is define the reasonable attempt. So that's kind of my philosophy, but I think what we need to do is start with each of the titles of this, moving into instructional services, and then flush out an overarching. It would be helpful for me today to talk about what is our overarching purpose or philosophy, and then maybe where those guiding principles fit in. Because one thing I see missing, that's one last thing I want to say, is one thing I see missing is any conversation around portrait for graduate skills. And the guiding principles, we talk about grading practices. There's the second bullet is student achievement, knowledge, and skill proficiency, but everything else is kind of how it's done, right? Practices, responsive to learning needs, a variety of assessment methods, providing clear understanding, but it's not really a philosophy of how we're going to grade. It's more of a philosophy of how we're going to communicate about the grading. So I do think somewhere within here we need to talk about portrait of a graduate if we're going to have that as a requirement for our students. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
If I will, before I get back to you, Dr. Anderson, a couple thoughts to answer some of your questions, right? Where am I looking for it? Under grading principles, the second bullet that says on non-academic factors such as behavior and participation may be communicated separately from academic grades to ensure the grades are a true measure of subject mastery. I mean, we can wax and wane philosophical for a year, right? And I'm open to engaging in that, but we also need to understand, from my perspective, like, our grade book is not set up to give a grade for POG skills. Our grade book is not set up to give a grade in things that we used to grade behavior on. So we've got to figure out how to communicate that. It has to be a priority. I don't think we're doing it effectively. I do agree, and I'm not familiar enough with elementary grading, but I have gotten some emails from people about elementary grading and wanting actually grades in 5th and 6th grade, and not just waiting until, 4th, 5th, and 6th, especially because our middle schools, they have grades in 6th grade. Because they feel, what's communicated to me is they can't get a 4, but I'm not getting into elementary grading right now. But that was one thought, and then, again, I'm not in disagreement, but I feel like I just want I want to caution folks about putting too much in a policy that's operations. So
That's my point, though, right? Like, if we're saying we can't talk about POG in a policy because the grade book doesn't support it, to me, that's saying that's the operational like, we're talking operations. Like, our job here isn't to say, well, they haven't operationalized it, so therefore we shouldn't do it. Our job here is to say, if these are the things that are embedded in our strategic plan, in our portrait for a graduate, how do we give policy guidelines on what we think it should be assessed? I don't think portrait for a graduate is just behavior, to be honest. I think it's beyond that. I mean, I think it's communications, it's collaboration, it's teamwork. There's a lot to it. So I'm not necessarily saying it needs to be graded in the grade book. That's kind of beyond my pay grade. That's operations. But I do think we as a board need to decide, are we going to just look at mastery of subjects and not look at portrait of graduate skills at all in our grading policy, in which case that's the direction we're sending our staff.
Okay. All right, I'm going to pause you there and go back to Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. I'm going to say one thing, but then I'm hoping to just organize us a little bit so we can walk out of here feeling productive. We don't have all the time in the world, and this is a big elephant, so I think we need to chunk it. One of the things that I want clarifications on before I give my spiel on chunking it is, I keep hearing credit bearing. credit-bearing courses, we want to keep in mind that this impacts the secondary grading practice that we have right now. It impacts students in grades 6 all the way up to 12. There's 3,000 sixth grade students that are under this. So I'm not sure what we mean by credit-bearing, because whether it be, Spanish or some other elective or math, the sixth grade students in the middle schools are under this umbrella. So I don't know if it matters to me as much. But let's just get to the task here to try to tackle this elephant, because I think,
To that point, I think we're talking about secondary versus elementary.
okay, got
I
it.
think that's the language, because we have credit-bearing courses in middle, and we have non-credit-bearing courses in middle. And
Absolutely.
to not have too many policies going, I think we're going to talk secondary or elementary.
We're keeping ourselves to secondary. So
That's what I would suggest.
that makes
we do.
sense to me. I just want to make sure there's
Right.
some clarification for myself. I'm sorry, these are really loud. Can we lower these? Because I feel like I can't push it far enough in order to not echo and blow out everybody's eardrums. The other thing that I want to say, I do agree with what Ms. Sizer, with what Rachna said, because clearly I'm struggling, in terms of, I don't think we should say we cannot put this in the policy because it does not already exist. We keep talking about the opportunity for innovation. This is a very serious, this is a great opportunity for us to innovate the secondary grade book. It does not tell you anything as a parent in terms of who my learner is. I see a letter grade, and whether the letter grade is, A through F, because I've seen the whole spectrum with other people, participates well. What does that mean? If there's some information that I need to have as a parent, I see an opportunity for us to make that a requirement so that the drop-down menu includes additional information. Having said that, could we go through and have some conversation on each section? Because I feel like we are going to add more sections. The easiest place that we could start is the purpose. Are we in agreement with the purpose that is here? Do we need to have additional language? Do we need to broaden the purpose? Because I think there's been wide consensus that some of these other more sparse, what do you call it? Policies could be combined. So do we need to broaden the purpose to be more inclusive of these other documents? And then after the purpose, I think I'm definitely hearing what I think I've said, which is let us separate a beliefs section. Like, what do we overall stand for as a school board? This may be harder, but I think we need to tackle that. And then we need to tackle the guiding principles, whether the guiding principles that you have listed here are stemming from the guiding principles from the secondary report. I think there are a lot of good nuggets here for us to talk about. And maybe these are the three things that we do really well today, in addition to determining some of the other categories that we will tackle, because I definitely think we need a definitions category. And if we're going to include some of these, I've started to list, a pass-fail, a graduation, a homework, a grading scale category.
So I've got those listed from your first round, definition components, including grading principles and belief section. But to go back to your first point, and do people want to talk about the purpose? Or do you guys want to, I'm going to take a vote. Do you want to go through the sections of the policy the draft I created, or do you want to go through the 6 things on the agenda?
I personally.
Between, like reassessment, and to have a dialogue about whether they belong in a
Two
policy?
things to vote on, and I think some hands are raised. Can you say the first one again?
All right.
I actually wanted to speak first before voting, but that's. I had something I wanted to add. I didn't know if this was.
This is going somewhat as I expected, because I knew my policy would be too bare bones for people. No, I'm just saying, like, I knew it would be too bare bones, right, because of the conversations. So I don't know if we want to, I think we should go back to the agenda and maybe have a dialogue about what we believe about each of these categories and whether or not we think they belong in a policy. So let's start the conversation about reassessment. Does that work for folks?
Is it time for me to speak, or are you looking for responses?
I don't want to take the committee in a direction they don't want to go. We're in this together. So,
Look, you gave us an outline of questions.
Right.
So I prepared for that, and we also talked about the 6 things in the report.
Right.
I'm not really that interested in creating whole new stuff, and while I love that you put something in writing, I only just got it, and I'm not comfortable having a conversation on that. You asked what was relevant, what might be missing, and we have the grading committee, they already listed their purpose.
Right.
So why wouldn't we just, let's just figure out how we want to do this. We also have a ton of staff
Right.
here.
Right.
What do we want to pose to them? I have some questions. So it seems like the meat of it is the 6 areas.
right, I agree with you.
So can we focus on that, and then we can get to, well, what about homework policy?
Yes.
And what do we feel about, elementary
So-
grading? Like,
So, because the current policy is so bare bones, it's clearly missing at most of the things that people want to talk about. So if we'll discuss the 6 focal points from grading, and let me get it around a set of hands from the 5 board members on here. As we go through these, do we want to talk and bang around reassessment first and then ask staff for their input, or do we want to ask staff for their input first? So if you want to ask staff for their input first, raise your hand. Okay, I guess I'm the only one that wants to ask staff.
I mean, they gave us documents,
I'm just going through them in order.
yeah. Dr.
'Cause it's the first one
was
listed.
very helpful to provide us with this document.
On the
So I'm
agenda.
imagining this is their input, the one that you sent, was it yesterday or Sunday?
Oh, I just did it by my agenda. My apologies. We can do it by the report if that's your preference. So we'll start with grade book type. So again, I guess, I'm going to open the floor to people who want to talk about grade book type. Okay, Dr. Anderson.
I am speaking about grade book type. Whether it be rolling, whether it be quarterly, it has to be consistent. And I'm not even married to it being consistent across every subject area, because I think there's some space where maybe in ceramics, you have that 1 year-end product, this is your vase, and that's what it is. So you don't have multiple assignments throughout the quarter. But it should not be that one math teacher has a rolling grade book, another math teacher has a quarterly grade book. Not within the school, not across schools. And I feel very strongly about this. And something in what you wrote here really stood out to me, and not in a great way, just to be honest, because it's saying if we were to go to one type of grade book, that the workload for staff would be essentially the way that it's written here as almost insurmountable, and that there'd be a frustration that is caused. Well, we have this frustration right now with parents who don't know how to interpret these grades. So grade book type, I'm looking for consistency. If the math is doing rolling, every single math class across the division is doing rolling. If art is doing quarterly, then every single art class is doing quarterly. I think there might be some space for conversations between the core content classes and some of the electives, not all of them, because I don't think the languages are necessarily falling into that category. So I think there's flexibility, but it has to be consistently applied.
So just to reiterate, your opinion is that the grade book type should be consistent across the division by subject?
yes.
At a minimum? But across the system by subject? Okay. Ms. Marin?
I agree, it has to be consistent. So if you're in a school and there's 3 sections of algebra, they're all graded the same. And I agree with what Dr. Anderson's saying, is that all the math classes then are the same. One thing I'm cautious about is when this gets implemented, what it's going to mean for students who are going to go through the transition of certain grades. And so I don't know if that's something about phasing, which is ironic to bring that up, but that is a thing, because some kids are going to get stuck between different grading systems. And I do think we need to figure out for those things that are not easily graded, like an IB project or phys ed or electives, we come up with that structure. But the policy could say there must be one consistent grading system established, and it shall be, alike across courses or alike across subject matter areas, right, in all schools.
Just trying to make sure I capture what you all say. Okay, Ms. Sizemore Heiser.
I guess I'm confused, so I apologize. Maybe it's being virtual, but are we skipping the purpose and scope and just answering the questions? Is that how we're trying to, and that's fine. I'm just trying to understand what we're doing.
We are abandoning the fact that, not that it's not appreciated, but we're abandoning my draft, and we are going back to the agenda, and we're going through the 6 items. So if you'd like to speak to your thoughts on whether grade book type should be included in the policy, please share your thoughts.
I'd be happy to. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to understand what we're doing.
No, you're fine.
In the agenda, I thought we were talking about, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, the other sort of the guiding principles first and then the 6 talks. I'm happy to share my thoughts in grade book. But I didn't know if we were going to go back to that first section.
We're going to go back to that eventually, but right now, we're talking about grade book type.
All right, well, I agree. I think we need to have a consistent grade book type. Unless there's some specific reason for a certain type of classes to have a rolling or quarterly grade book, I think we need to be consistent. I also think we need to, when we think about grade book type, it relates to reassessments. And so I don't think we can have this conversation in vacuum. I think we need to give some guidance around reassessments with grade book type. But I think we need to be consistent with what we expect.
Can I ask Dr. Presidio to speak to that, since staff is here?
Hold up. We voted to let everyone talk before we, I wanted to involve staff first, but we're going to go with how we voted. So, Rachna, just to be clear, consistent, do you mean consistent among an entire school or consistent among the entire system?
Well, I'd love to hear from Dr. Reed, actually, in terms of whether consistent across the entire system makes sense, or across the entire school, or across departments. I mean, without sort of that,
Okay.
I would, consistent across the entire system would be what I would lean towards, unless there's a reason that we would want to have inconsistency. But I don't think,
Okay.
I definitely inconsistency in a school makes
Okay.
sense.
Thank you. We're going to get to staff in 1 second. Seema, do you have any thoughts that you want to share first?
I think I'll agree with what other board members said. I think consistency is very important, and I would like to hear from the staff about whether it should be in the school or across the system.
Okay, so at this point, I'll invite Dr. Reed to share her thoughts on gradebook type being delineated in a school board policy.
The type of a grade book being delineated in a policy. I feel like that's more of a regulation. I think that a policy in general is at the level of expectation. I think it's very helpful to have a policy that says grading and reporting shall be consistent across the division without delving into the type of grade book people actually end up using. But I think the concept of consistency rightly belongs in a policy. I think when we talk about equitable access and opportunity and excellence, that depends on a level of consistency that we maintain across the division. How we maintain it may differ, right? High expectations require high support, but that support could look different site to site, but we can't change our expectation.
Thank you. Board members, do you have additional follow-up questions for staff? Dr. Anderson?
I hear you, and I think I'm a little confused, because originally, I think we do need to have consistency across the division. I think in the documents that were provided, in the presentation that Dr. Presidio gave to us, reassessments, all of the things that currently exist, it can be done in each format of gradebook. I, for one, would not want to leave it that open-ended so that we have inconsistencies that we don't know about in the school division. Because the recommendations from the secondary committee back in May, I believe, or April, were to leave it open for everybody to do whatever they want. That clearly the system supports that, staff supports that. As a parent, I certainly do not support that. So we are at a place where we might need to get specific, and it's not what staff believes is the better recommendation. I'm struggling to understand a situation where two math teachers in a school would need to have two different grade books.
If I may, I cannot think of any time of me being a director at Chantilly where any of our departments had different grading policies. No, they were consistent within that department at that school. What you're asking for, I understand, to be consistency across the entire division of selecting a specific gradebook type. That has not existed, but consistency within a school and within departments has existed. And of course, with this year, the entire school, I think, had to select either a rolling gradebook or,
Nope.
so it's still by CLT. Still by collaborative team. Okay, but every team has to be doing the same way.
But we also, until this year, we also had weighting be vastly different across our schools. Some schools did 90-10, some
No,
schools did
this is correct.
60-40. That is now new and different. And with the level of transiency that we have with our kids, they are owed that consistency as they perhaps travel from school to school. We're supposed to be one system. This is a place to articulate that.
I certainly understand your point. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, do you have any questions for staff?
Yes, I was unmuting my mic. Dr. Reed, I'm trying to understand what you said a little bit. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Are you saying that we should leave it up to each collaborative team to decide what kind of grade book makes sense, and help me understand how that would be better? Like in what way would one team be so different than another in terms of the needs of the students that a different type of grade book would make sense?
This is, how do I put this? A discussion about the type of grade book a teacher uses is an unusually operational discussion, honestly. Having taught a variety of different topics, I think I set my grade book up differently depending on what I was teaching, right? When I taught physics, I set my grade book up a little different than when I taught physical education, because I was really assessing, set up my units differently, exams differently, performance tasks differently. I don't know that if I was teaching machining or welding, if I would set my grade book up the same as if I was teaching symphonic orchestra. I don't know. I also think that when we put something in policy about a type of grade book and then technology shifts and we're able to do a different kind of, and I'll use grade book in air quotes, then do we come back for a policy shift? If we're going to look at, I think the type of grade book is, to me, a tool. I think the outcome is a level of consistency. I think a grading scale is critically important to be consistent. I'm fine with no D-. I'm not actually sure how that snuck in there. I think that was part of the 100-point scale, but doing away with the D- is fine. I think it sends an unusual message too, right? So, but I do think the scale is important. I think retake policies are important to be consistent. The tool of a grade book, I don't know. I could do my physics problem with a slide rule or a calculator or mental math or charts and grids, but if you mandate which thing I have to use, it feels a little constricting. So I think the overall enduring understanding on this for me is that there is consistency. The type of tool, maybe that does need to be consistent from the policy level. I just see it shifting as we have different tools available to us that are maybe even more transparent for families or students than what we currently have. So that's all I was trying to say. I do think the idea of consistency is critical. The type of grade book, I don't know. I mean, we'll live with whichever way the board wishes on this for sure. I think that people use different strategies to go about that.
I feel like we're talking about two different things. My intention isn't to say this is how you set your grade book up. I think what I'm trying to say, and maybe what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, is that we're expecting a consistency from quarterly, right? So within a quarterly grade book or rolling, people can set theirs up how they wish to, but so maybe, and maybe that is what you're talking about, but that's what I feel like there's a difference between a rolling and quarterly grade book, because then it changes how you do reassessments or retakes. It changes, sort of how long a bad grade can impact a student. So that's what I'm looking at, as opposed to how many types of assessments or what assessments, or whether it's a slide rule or a whatever. I don't think that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to say consistency between, does the grade book end at each quarter and start fresh, or is it a rolling grade book? So in terms of those two pieces, Dr. Reed, do you still feel like teachers need, within each individual class, more flexibility in terms of trying to decide a grade book ends each quarter, or it goes rolling all year, or collaborative teams?
So I think that should be consistent, whether it ends at this, I would probably argue the semester, right? Ours, I've traditionally been a part of always ending at the semester, because those are what are posted to a transcript. I assume still, they're not posted to a transcript in Virginia? Oh, so you don't have a mid-year grade at all? So you just have an end of
Well,
year?
it's not by the state. Like Loudoun County does, they have semester grades that are final grades, but we
Right.
don't,
Interesting.
unless it's a semester course.
Right. Well, that's what I meant. I mean, so,
Right.
Yeah, I guess that was my point, is I'm not at least looking to put very specific about grade book in a policy. I agree that's very operational. I just think we do need to be consistent. Our policy should say that either schools or the division will be consistent with the type of grade book. I'm going to have quarterly or semester, right? There's a finite period of time, or it's rolling.
Okay.
That's what I would, if
Yeah.
we make that decision. I
I'll
would-
give you a go back, because I see Ms. Dixit's hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lady. I actually was listening and kind of, we were talking a lot on different things, but now it's coming together. I'm happy to see that. So I wanted to see, based on the surveys and from different community groups, staff, and students, it's a very clear indication that everybody wants consistency around FCPS, from school, particular school grading should be consistent. That's what the feedback was. And the majority, I would say, from a different group also prefers a rolling grade book. So is this something we are, I mean, that's something I would agree also with, but I don't know, maybe that's not the call we are making now. Just wanted to state that.
So I'm hearing you say that you want consistency, and from what you read in the different reports, you're leaning towards rolling grade book being consistent across all schools in the system.
Yes, based on the responses I'm hearing, and also from my own son's perspective, and he was in school.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Marin.
Yeah, so let me see if I could summarize this and move us along. And I just do want to understand the next step. So our staff, are you capturing the things that we're thinking are going to go in the policy? Like, who is capturing and what's coming out of this? Because what I've got is like a summary of what I think there's agreement on that could then be put into language. So Dr. Presidio, do you want to?
We're all taking notes, but we're not taking any action items until you all reach consensus.
Sure,
So-
fair enough. I'm just wondering, at the conclusion of this conversation, do we want to ask the superintendent to come back with their expert, draft, reconsider yours after we've had this conversation? Because what I'm hearing from everyone is that one grade book type for the whole school division.
Except for me.
Well, okay, but, so what I tried to clarify is the regulation shall stipulate the gradebook type in practice to be used in all schools. Same courses and courses with the same subject matter, i.e. language, arts, history, science, math, shall use the same grading practice. Regulation shall stipulate the grading practice for courses not in the, quote, core academic area, which I think is defined somewhere, like the arts, IB, PE. So what I'm trying to get us to articulate is, and this is something that I think has been confusing. We have the policy, we have the reg, and then we have the practice. And so the reg is supposed to be talking about the practice. So I think it's good we talked about gradebook type, but it also sounds like we're not going to come into agreement, and that's not necessarily our space. So. I agree, but can we try and, are we agreement that we want one grade book type to be determined by regulation? For the whole practice? That's what I understood you saying, Dr. Anderson.
Yes, and I want to also leave flexibility where it may be needed.
Right.
Just similarly to what Dr. Reed said, PE, I think, has a
Well,
very
that's what I was
different
trying
setup.
to, right, so then I
yes.
think the task becomes articulating that directive. And I tried to capture it, but we're gonna need to like wordsmith it and make sure, like, do we talk about the core four, well, world languages and that, like, that's the stuff that then the staff could work out in regulation, right? It keeps us at the high level, but you're saying you want different grade books, but, because.
Well, here's my fear, right? I've worked in a school. I know that when Chantilly decided they were doing rolling grade books, I know that what happened with the morale of that entire staff. You know, I know how long it took to make that transition. So I guess my question to staff would be, like, and it's my understanding that when Dr. Presidio shared the edict of how things were going to be this year, that there were several high school principals who walked out of the meeting.
Well, just.
Okay, no? Okay, that's what
But also, I mean, okay, then for me as a parent,
I was told.
for me as a parent, I've seen what it's like to have your student have many different sets of retakes and grading. I mean,
Right.
we can only go forward, and the grading practices that were put out, the grading thing, it happened. Where we go now is, you know, yes, I mean, I have right here on my binder, what's the impact on teachers? What supports do teachers need? That, we got to keep that central. It doesn't mean we can't set the edict.
I agree.
So if we can agree one grade book type, we can call that a success for the afternoon and go on to the next one, which is the weighting. And let's just keep talking, because, you know, we're already halfway done with our meeting.
Well, I think we can table the grade book type at this point, but I do think that if we're going to ask Dr. Reed to come back with some sort of like even language that could be in there related to grade book to see if it's palatable. I do like what you have captured, but I have to see it besides just hear it to fully comprehend it. So I agree, so we can move on to,
Should we just take a consensus vote? Because I know that's what Dr. Presidio mentioned that he's kind of looking for.
Sure.
Because those things would be important, so to articulate everybody in the room, and
So-
Rocky has hands up.
Rochester, do you need to speak to this again, or are you okay if we take a vote on the consistency? Okay, so.
I was just say, let's just vote on having a consistent grade book type and then,
Okay.
you know, we operationalize it.
So here's my question. You have two options. Do you believe the policy should indicate one grade book type consistently across the entire district for secondary schools? Or do you believe that there should be one grade book type across, within each school? There's actually three options. Okay, first option, consistent grade book across the district, every subject. So it's the same, although they can, of course, can set it up their own way. The second one is consistent across disciplines, so math across the system has the same, okay? The third option is schools have to do all of one thing. So there's three options. So number one, consistent grade book across the entire system, every discipline, every school. Who wants that? Raise your hands. Oh, okay, I thought I heard that. Okay, number two, consistency across the system by
Hold on,
discipline.
I'm sorry, Miss Lady. Miss Dixit had her hand raised. Was
Oh.
Miss Dixit, were you voting for number one?
I did vote for I was saying I would vote for number one, but I don't know if it's practically possible.
Okay. Dr. Reed?
Yeah?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, because I responded, then Ms. Sizemore-Heiser responded. I was speaking to the structure of a grade book, as Ms. Sizemore-Heiser mentioned, not whether it's rolling or semester. I think that those are two different questions. So I do think you can make a decision rolling or semester for any content area. And I don't know if the board wants to get that specific or not.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I think I was confused as well regarding your answer, because, yeah, the structure, how you set it up, nobody cares. It's just Well, at this level.
Dr. Presidio?
Thank you, and I'll keep this comment brief. I thought I heard actually a fourth option in the discussion, which was a consistent gradebook type within a school by department or collaborative team, which really gives those teachers on that team the flexibility to decide which gradebook type is going to work best for them by discipline. If we try to centralize that and say music teachers are going to use this gradebook type and CTE teachers are going to use this gradebook type, that is going to be challenging. I'm not saying, of course, we'll do it if that's what the board wants us to do, but I thought I had heard an option within schools for consistency by department or by team. So anyway, just for your consideration.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Just a quick reminder, once upon a time, all of the grade books were quarterly. I just want to make sure that we don't lose track of what has been. But I am vehemently against number 4 because I think that's where we are right now.
I thought number 2 was, since we're just speaking up, I thought number 2 was consistent across the division, across disciplines. So math would be one type of grade book, performing arts would be another type. It wouldn't be per school, it would be across the entire division.
That's what I threw out. So who would like to vote for number 2? Okay, it looks like we have, is it Rachna, your hands up?
Yep.
Rachna, Ricky, and Melanie.
Right, to reiterate, consistent across the division, across disciplines.
Great, across disciplines. Well, that's 3. So I guess it's not worth it to go through the other options. So,
Seem, are you voting for that too?
yeah, Dr. Presidio.
So I'm probably going to need a little bit more direction on that, because if that's what we want to put in policy, then it begs the question, which gradebook type would we use by discipline, right? Well,
That would be operational.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear about that. Because that's going to mean we're going to have to, as a grading committee, collect a lot of input and feedback about what's going to work best for people and based on their departments, which is fine. We can do that, but people, of course, will come to the table with different opinions and different ideas about what's going to work best for them. And we're basically mandating, for some teachers, one grade book type over another in the name of consistency. So I just want to put that out there. As long as the direction is we have to be consistent across the division by department, that would be the process that we would kind of take forward to work with the grading committee to figure out what we would recommend based on each content area to mandate either a rolling grade book, which most of our schools use, 57% are using, or a traditional grade book.
And just to be clear, both issue quarter grades.
That's right.
They both issue quarter grades, and they all issue final grades. And so for what it was worth, I would have voted for consistency among teams at a school. So, and again, this will be, we'll put this in, we're going to develop a policy that ultimately is going to be shared with the rest of the board, and we're going to do a work session, I would think, right? Okay.
Yes, a work session is
Hang on,
scheduled
Ms. Marin,
currently.
Ms. Marin's next.
Yeah, so just to reiterate process, so we did have a work session with the staff presented, now the governance committee is looking at it, then we will have another work session with what we bring to the rest of the board, and then it should be then that it goes to vote. I just want to share, having the same grade book among disciplines in a school doesn't work well for students, because then you have some students in some schools competing, and then there's other students in different FCPS schools, and everyone's competing for those same spots in our colleges. And this is what I've been told by my constituent parents. So if a certain grading system in one school is a little more lenient or different, and then this school isn't, well, everyone's competing for those slots. So, so we have to make that consistent.
If I can speak to that real quickly.
Sure, but I'm telling you, this is the experience of kids.
Well-
Kids are feeling like they are
Right.
not getting the
Right.
same opportunities because other schools use different things.
So I'll use an example without naming schools. While I was working at Chantilly, I'll name that, there was another school that had a very lenient retake policy in their mathematics courses. And those kids, if they were smart, took advantage of that and predominantly got A's in upper-level math courses. Our kids at Chantilly would hear about this, and they would be sort of infuriated. I would also tell you that our AP scores were superior to that school's AP scores. And when colleges read files, we'll just leave it at this, it is my expertise, they evaluate you by your school. Readers get to know schools. Readers get to know subject matters where kids get consistently A's in a particular subject at a school. That doesn't mean I'm dismissive of how kids or parents feel. But I'm just saying that what I think needs to be in the policy is consistency around reassessment, because that's where the kids kids got tripped up, is that they didn't seem like it was fair that some kid they knew across the county could be reassessed up to a 95 and they could only be reassessed up to an 80.
Well, I just want to say, though, to finish up my turn, I think it's very problematic that college admissions people they know which school is which and which, I mean, that's the very reason why we're trying to do this, is to take out that perception of what certain, college admissions people think, well, this school only has this caliber, so I'm going to discount this student's work. I mean, that's the very heart of this. And the only way it's going to work is if ours, does Loudoun do that? And I wanted to review other school divisions' policies. What do they do? It's just harder because we have 25 schools.
I did look at Loudoun and Arlington, that they're vague in this area.
Well, yeah, if I could, and you might recall from the work session, we talked about this particular issue in terms of what those 10 comparison districts do. And as Dr. Reed mentioned earlier, my experience is similar. I've never worked in a school division where the gradebook type was mandated, and none of the 10 school divisions that we looked at that are comparison school districts require a single gradebook type. The other thing I would say, and this just, again, for what it's worth, not to relitigate this whole topic, your point about the students needing to have an equitable experience across schools is absolutely correct. But that's what we tried to do as a grading committee with all of those other practices, like Ms. Lady mentioned, the reassessment practice, category weighting, minimum number of assignments, everything else, make that all the same. So there's very little difference between a quarter grade book and a rolling grade book. It's just when does that particular grade book close. So on the quarter grade book, the traditional quarter grade book, it closes at each quarter. It's averaged at the end of the year. The rolling grade book is open until the end of the year, but the reassessment policies are the same for both grade books. So the advantage of the rolling grade book is really for teachers that might have assignments that span across quarters. So they have more flexibility to have an assignment that they might assign in quarter one and assess part of it in quarter one and assess part of it in quarter two, instead of having the traditional grade book that creates more limitations for them in terms of when the grade is due. So we tried really hard as a committee to make sure that all of the other policies were consistent so that the grade book type really would not be a major issue. Now, I understand the intent of what the governance is trying to do with a consistent policy on grade book type. I'm happy to support it. I just wanted to make sure that everybody kind of knew the work that the grading committee had done on that previously.
Can I just turn, what we want is consistency. What I personally want is for you to tell us how we can get there. If you think having 2 grading books is it, then I will advocate to promote that in the policy. If you think having a better reassessment policy is it, tell us how to get to consistency, because the committee doesn't recommend it. The committee says, here are the options. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no.
What's the staff's recommendation?
No, that's what we presented at the work session on each of those topics, was the recommendation from the committee. And on gradebook type, it was to preserve the ability for teachers within or across schools, let's say, okay? Consistency within the school makes a lot of sense, right? That makes a tremendous amount of sense. But for the gradebook type, we had adjusted all of the other practices for consistency. So for the gradebook type, we were recommending continuing to allow the flexibility for teachers within that school, so school A versus school B, to make the determination and decision, do we want to stay on a rolling gradebook or a traditional gradebook within our department and team? So that was what the committee recommended. Everything that we went through at the work session on each of those topics was what the committee and staff were recommending.
Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. what you've just described just now in terms of what happens within the grade book, whether it be rolling or traditional, it doesn't sound like it's a big deal. So it shouldn't be a big deal. If we're looking to give some flexibility to teachers who have assignments across quarters, we kind of already have a sense as to who those are. Because we know we have common assessments now in all of the subject areas that, kindergarten through 12 will have to be taken quarterly. So we know that is shutting the door on certain things. And we know the subjects in which those quarterly assessments are to be administered. It's primarily the core content. So I think what I'm hearing is it would not be a deal breaker for those core content areas to have one type of grade book, or I don't care what it is, so long as it is consistent, but the ones that seem to need that flexibility are those harder to, cut off areas. They still get a quarterly grade, so something has to happen. I feel as if we're having a lot of conversation for something that is not that different, but we do need the consistency across our schools. As Melanie said, we have kids who are vying for the same slots, and if there seems to be more leniency in one place than another, then I think that has to be something that we deal with. It shouldn't have to be up to college readers to determine that, well, this school is more rigorous. We've talked about having that equity of rigor across our schools. This gives us a place to do that. And so that consistency should be happening. I don't think everyone should just do whatever they need based solely on what you said, plus my other thoughts. But I wanted to be sure the vote that we just took regarding disciplines, it would not be your expectations that those content areas all do something differently from each other, like those 4 core content areas given the quarterly assessments that you all have put together for this year.
So, obviously, we'll have to think about it a little bit more and discuss it with the committee, but no, I would assume that probably you're going to see a split with core content areas and things maybe like world languages on one type of grade book and elective areas possibly on another type of grade book. But we'll have to have those discussions
Yeah.
with the committee because, again, we've got teachers, administrators, students, parents, they're all with different perspectives on it.
Sure. And so now the committee members that are already on this committee, they have been, I guess, identified by you, or they self-selected to be on it, so that we want to make sure we have everybody's voice be in the room. Because if we are able to make the switch with the weighting, which I think is way much more into the weeds, then I think this is an easy switch to make. So how does one get on the committee if one is not on it, if they're perceiving these changes to come forward?
Well, I think that's up to the board if there's more direction that you would want to give us on the membership of the committee. We had folks that volunteered. We reached out to the employee associations to get folks from the employee associations on the committee. Again, some folks reached out directly either to myself or to Dr. Reed. So we did a variety of different recruitment strategies in terms of composition of the committee. But if board members wanted to add more folks to the committee, that's certainly something we would accommodate, so.
Ms. Dixit.
So I did hear about that schools have flexibility on either grading book. They can go with the quarterly or rolling, but and the consistency, but it's different than the surveys are saying. Surveys saying the most of the students and the staff and the community wants one grade book. Either it could be quarterly or rolling. And I think having both, it's kind of like, again, we're talking about inconsistencies after inconsistency. So if you're trying to be consistent, do we not go with one type of grade book here? That's my question.
Is that a question for staff?
I guess, yes.
I don't know that I would have much to add on that. We're going to take our direction from the board as a body. Staff's recommendation, again, though, is to allow the teams within a school to determine the gradebook type that best meets how they're organizing their curriculum across the 4 quarters. And again, every discipline could look a little bit different. Even our core content areas, even with common assessment, still have projects and presentations and different things that might span across quarters. IB extended essays and things are examples of that. But again, I mean, we'll make whatever the board decides you would like to see in policy. We'll figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah, I think I was asking a different question. Maybe I didn't phrase it well. There is obviously we're talking about consistency across the divisions with different disciplines. That's we agreed on, but which type of grade book is what I was going with. The surveys are saying rolling is preferred, and most of the people want to stick with one type of grade book. So I wanted to ask, is that what also the staff agrees to or recommends?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand the question appropriately. So, yeah, so on that point, what we would do is we'll take the directive of the board back to the committee, again, that has different perspectives, stakeholder voices on it, to try to figure out what would be the best type of grade book in those different disciplines. I wouldn't want to do that just in isolation from instructional services. I'd want to do that work with the committee members.
Okay, thank you.
So I think to clarify Dr. Presidio's comments, staff believe they should have consistent grade books among teams at a school, and that what should be consistent across the system are things like the reassessment policy with specificity, things like number of assignments, things like, percentage of formative summative. I think what I'm hearing is that those are the things that make the consistency in terms of grading experience across the system. So to that point, it makes me wonder if we should sort of move to reassessment, because we might be able to look at some of these other things, come to consensus, and then rethink the thinking around gradebook. I'm only suggesting that because staff has consistently said that they would like that freedom. So,
I think that's a compromise, but we can move on if you like.
Sorry, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I think what we voted on is that compromise, right? Because what I'm hearing is the grading committee, when I dug into the report and the raw data, it wasn't that they thought the inconsistency of gradebook was appropriate. I think they just thought that there's benefits to both types of gradebooks. Is when I dug into the report and the data that they couldn't really agree on which is better, instead of allowing the sort of the different ones to be used. But what I'm hearing from the community is a desire for consistency of grade books across the division, as Ms. Dixit said. So I think what we came up with is actually kind of a compromise. We're allowing different departments to use whichever grade book works best for them, but instead of different departments within each school, because we want to ensure that, math curriculum, and I think I've heard staff talk about the importance of ensuring math curriculum is consistent across the school, or fine arts curriculum is consistent across the schools, not just within each school, but across. So this allows each department to use whichever grade book is unique to that department's needs, but across the division, not across the school, so we get rid of that inconsistency. So I would just say, I think this is a good compromise between what we're hearing in the community and staff's recommendations, and it gives that flexibility that the staff wanted to give to each department. It just kind of makes it across the division. So I think we have landed in a good place.
So we'll table that point, that piece at this point. I would say that I think what I'm hearing from parents, because I haven't really shared that, is they want consistency at their school. So, Ms. Marin.
So I just want to think about it from the student's perspective as far as I can, because I have a high school freshman now and a middle schooler, and we have friends and we talk to them. So right now, if one teacher uses a rolling grade book and one teacher uses the other one that's just flown out of my head, quarterly, which, by the way, some high schools offer semester courses and some do not. I learned that too recently. So that's a little pin to put in. But so if a student has all these different classes, and this teacher is quarterly, and this teacher is rolling, and this teacher allows, and maybe we'll figure out the assessment and the retake, But in the course of a day, or like, how do you even then do like team-led stuff? So what if like at Madison High School, when they're doing the projects where they're working across disciplines? So what if they're all different, two are one way and two are another? How do you do a project that extends? I hear what you're saying, Dr. Presidio, but I'm also looking at the survey data of students, and on this one, I mean, they are the experts in how it feels, and we know how stressed they get, and we know how important they are. So I got to stick to what I originally advocated for, which was consistent across the division, across disciplines, so that math in one place is math, another PE one place is PE another, but it's not different. But even then, I mean, with the four core, I think they should be all alike. So, thanks.
Okay, so let's talk about reassessment.
We should have it. I think the committee's recommendation on reassessment is, sorry, I shouldn't have raised my mic to speak since I don't have my documents. I think their reassessment is to reassess to the full 100%. Is that correct, Dr. Presidio? I think that needs to be what occurs. That is a good spot. I've always been a strong believer in not everybody learns everything by Tuesday. Sometimes some of us need Wednesday, and I should not have to be penalized because I needed that additional day. Obviously, I think teachers have done a good job of not reassessing, not recreating a huge amount of work for themselves and ensuring that students have accountability before that reassessment. And I don't want to get into those weeds because, again, trying to keep up here as you've asked. So yes, I think the assessment should be happening at the 100% level across the division. Oh, there also might be just one little caveat, because again, I'm not 100% clear as to how, like, photography and some of those more difficult classes are to evaluate, what that reassessment could look like. So perhaps there should be a flexibility, but I think with the core content classes, reassessment to 100 should definitely take place.
Ms. Dixit.
Okay, so I also agree with that, and also I hear the students' voice in staff's voice also on this is kind of consistent. And having my son just graduated high school, I mean, he was a student, but there were times when he would not feel well and take a test and get 75 on it or whatever, right? So especially it hurts for the hardworking students because then they could only go up to 80%, even they did the best they could. So for hardworking students, for our students progressing through the year, where they're starting a little bit shaky, but then they improve over the year, I think giving them the 100% chance is definitely important, and I would definitely support that.
Thank you, Ms. Dixit. Ms. Marin?
I do support having the policy speak to reassessment. I think that's an essential, and perhaps we have agreement on that aspect. I think when I look at the grading committee's report, I think there's too much subjectivity that the teacher teams will determine all guidelines for reassessment. That's a no-go for me. Assignments, there was one, assignments informative are not eligible unless a teacher, team, or department chooses to allow for reassessment. That's also too subjective to me. So these are the questions I have. And in the report, I know it talks about reassessment and late work. I think that it's really part of the same thing. Is late work, if it's late formative, eligible for reassessments, or is it just the subpar grades that propel the student to want to do it? I think that the reassessment practice needs to be uniform for each identical course across schools. And I don't know, maybe that's not realistic, but if a student retakes an Algebra 1 exam in one school, should it be similar in another school? I mean, can we get to that level of equity, or is that just where the art and the science of teaching comes in? And grading, I mean, grading is an art and a science, right? So I think too, I want to be reasonable. Again, I think maybe it's not a cap on what can be earned, because I do agree with the 100, but rather a cap at what grade an assignment can be reassessed. So what does that function? Is it just straight up like, okay, we're going to say a 70 or, a C, you can do a reassessment. But if you get an A, you're not eligible for a reassessment. Again, we're protecting teachers' time and, we're going to help those kids who maybe didn't perform their best but could. Well, that's just one idea. The other one could be, is it maybe a percentage of their grade? I don't know. But what I've heard in discussion and in the report is we need to protect against lots of students doing retakes for grades that are reasonably good, like in the B's and A's, because that's going to be a lot on teachers, to the students who really could improve and show their mastery by a retake. So that's a question I have. Should the timeline for retakes be clear? Some teachers allow, well, if you get your late work in for 2 weeks, we'll give it to you. If you didn't do it or you didn't pass the test, you want to retake it, you've got a week. I think that should be consistent. But is there an individual version of this? Like, what if a student's out on medical? What's the policy for that? And if using a rolling gradebook, isn't reassessment kind of built in anyway? I mean, as the practice? And then should reassessments be optional or should they be mandatory? Because I've seen places where they're both. So again, maybe the policy doesn't need to speak to all these things, like the yes or no, but should it list out things? The regulation should have these practices that speak to all of those things. So, so I support having the reassessment stated in the policy, 100, and then a whole bunch of other questions, so.
Are those questions you want staff to?
Well, I think someone might have wanted to respond, which is fine, and we can have a discussion about them, so whatever, sure.
Ms. Clemenco?
No, I appreciate Ms. Marin's comments. The one thing, and having had this conversation so many times about the reassessment, let me just put it in context. Imagine you took a test and you got a 85, right? And Dr. Anderson took the test and she got a 60. So she gets the chance to retake it and she could get 100, but you're stuck with your 85. I don't think we can, that is the hard part and where we get into this situation. So I understand, and maybe you already had thought that through all the way and you're okay with it. I just think that leaves us open to a lot of questions from students and parents. I agree with.
So thank you for that. I'll go to Ms. Sizemore-Heiser now.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm kind of where Ms. Marin is. I believe in reassessments. I don't necessarily think we should cap it at 80 or 90 or think we can allow reassessments. We allow reassessments. I do think in the policy, we need to give, again, some guidance around some bounds around reassessment. And talking to staff and students and parents, I think, there's got to be some, outside of a medical or excuse, an attempt to try it, right, before you can reassess it. So students aren't just staying home to get extra time, or maybe an attempt, if you want a reassessment, do some formative assignments to learn before you do the reassessment. That's another idea I've heard people suggest, is that yes, on reassessments, absolutely, but let's demonstrate some ability of learning in between, so that way that we can show that they're trying to learn the material. But I think there's got to be some guardrails around reassessment, so it's being used for the purpose that we're designing it for, which is give students who might need longer to learn, right, or to demonstrate knowledge that time, without it being used maybe in ways that we don't intend. So I would recommend that there is either a reasonable attempt, unless you're out sick, or here's some formative assignments that you can do. I've also heard from students that this reassessment causes incredible amounts more stress on them because they're in this constant do loop of reassessments while trying to learn new material. So I think that also putting some guardrails around it would also help students just kind of move on and focus on the new material. So I think the philosophy behind reassessments is good, but I would prefer to say we allow reassessments upon reasonable attempt outside of emergencies or medical conditions, and upon completion of formative assignments. Doesn't have to be graded formative, just completion to demonstrate the work towards a reassessment, and maybe some time bound. I don't know, but that would be my suggestion, is put some guidance around it.
All right, thank you. Ms. Dixit?
So I was just going to add to that comment. I totally agree that when, a student can retake, and then get to 100%, the other student got an 85, cannot take a retake. So that's using it, that's a disadvantage. So I guess the guidelines should be there, obviously in some way that a teacher or a school can decide on those framework, like if the student is sick or has any other emergency and they're doing it, or has some circumstance around it. It should not be just like, I just want to do it, and it can't be unlimited attempt either. So and within the few days or few day week or 1 week after the test. So I know there has to be some structure around it, but I didn't want to say that they can just keep doing it till they get 100%, right? Then every student will try to do that. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Presidio.
Because we're having a lot of discussions that we had as a committee and already reached some consensus on as a committee. Now, obviously, whatever you choose to put in policy, we're going to figure out how to make work. But on the reassessments, the major issue was to try to get equity of opportunity for students across the division. So to Noelle's point, that's why the committee ended up with the opportunity to reassess up to 100%, being the most fair. And being based on really the opportunity to demonstrate what students learn with time as the variable, as Dr. Anderson mentioned. But we absolutely discussed the need to limit that to summative assessment so that students weren't reassessing everything. One attempt at a reassessment up to 100%, with the teacher being able to determine what students needed to do before they completed that reassessment. So being able to say, you need to check in with me and have a discussion. You need to do a test correction of your previous test. You need to do this practice, assignment before you do the reassessment, right? So the committee has already come up with a lot of the guidelines and the guideposts around that. We didn't include all of that in the presentation because we didn't think we were going to get down in kind of that level of operational detail. But a lot of these things, we've already got work product around it, which we could provide if you wanted to put that level of detail into the policy. But we were thinking that level of detail really lived, probably not even in the regulation, but in the secondary grading and practice guidelines about the implementation of how you implement this, this requirement that's in policy. So I don't know if that helps or not, but for both of these topics, I think we've got a lot of that operational detail.
So I'll just take my turn. I am comfortable with up to 100% with one attempt. Having said that, I have heard from far too many families that when their students matriculate to college, they don't understand, they don't get to reassess anything. And so I think when we're talking about POG skills, we're talking about soft skills, we're talking about executive functioning, which has come up in many of our conversations. I also think that grade inflation is real in the sense that, and back to what Ms. Marin said, which is the reality is, I think it was Ms. Marin, about the anxiety around retakes and feeling like I've got a 95, I need to study for it and take it again, I need to get to 100. So I don't know where that allows me to land. I have lots of cognitive dissonance around this because I get the understanding that time is a variable in learning, but I also know we have kids that are full IB diploma candidates, we have kids taking 5 and 6 AP classes, and they're not going to, those kids who are hardcore college bound, and any of our college bound kids need to understand when they get to college, for the most part, there is no reassessment. And I don't know how we exit kids with that thinking because they're running into brick walls. And another reason why eventually I want us to drill down on our clearinghouse data to see how our kids are doing after they graduate and if they are thriving at the schools that they've matriculated to. So I think we're back to go back. So Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. And Dr. Presidio, I think you responded to two of my points, which is retakes, reassessments are not mandatory. So it's not, no student is forced to do it. And it is time-bound. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, and back to school night, everybody said within 2 weeks. So it's not something that's going to go on forever. Is that consistent across the division? Or is that just where my kids' schools landed?
Well, I mean, there's some variability in terms of the time frame. Again, we've kind of left that up to the teacher.
But there's a limitation.
There is
It-
a limitation. You
it
can't go
does-
back and reassess something from, 9 months prior.
Thank you. And it is one, and it is the summatives. One of the things that I also want to make sure we clarify that I heard in the conversation, there's reassessments and then there's makeup because you were absent. If a kid missed school, that's not a retake. That's just the first take. So I heard those waters being muddied. I do agree that I think we need to have some conversation regarding reassessment, particularly how it's treated in terms of 100%. And we could hint to consistencies across, the time and the number and which assessments. But I think how many and those assessments, that needs to live in the regulation. But I think it'll be a good idea for us to say, you should also provide consistency around these areas.
Ms. Marin?
Yeah, a point I just meant to raise earlier is, I think, I've tried to change my vernacular so that it's policy, it's regulation, it's practice. But I think another thing we really have to separate is the grading and the reporting. Because the report card piece and the reporting is a different thing. And I think that's conflated in a few places that I've read. And also, that could be a separate thing. And also, I mean, we need to include students in this because, it's not just the reporting to parents and guardians, it's really for students and staff, right? It's everyone. So I think that's kind of the mindset. So, I mean, Dr. Presidio, thank you for clarifying that the report includes, the recommendations. I'd say some of them I don't think are strong enough, like the, things being determined by the teacher or the team. So, one thing I'm thinking about, we have about 20 minutes left, is, for me, I like to write stuff out, and that's how it'll get figured out. And so maybe, I might write it just to say, like, if I wanted to put it in, what would I put in? And does that help us to each articulate, if that was something everyone wanted to do, we could each articulate it. I think it's helpful to understand where we're coming from. But if we were to go back to the recommendations, say, okay, this is what staff thinks. What are our questions? What are our concerns? So that's, I guess, what I'm going to share for now.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Yeah, just really quickly, I appreciate Dr. Presidio, you saying that it is time bound. Some of the other things you shared, because that's the first I'm hearing that, to be honest, across the division. I'm hearing from a lot of people that it's different from school to school and teacher to teacher. And I think that's exactly how we kind of got here, right? Is some of that inconsistency. So I think if the intention of the committee, as I'm understanding what you're saying, is to make it time bound and is to require either a reasonable attempt or leave it up to the teacher to have the student show some effort, I think we need to codify to some level. So for example, I would recommend the policy say we allow reassessments up to 100% with the caveat that it needs to be time bound and the student must show some reasonable effort to learn. And that's vague and broad, but it kind of gives a guiding policy direction. And then that can be implemented either across the division or in the schools. But I do think we need to make that clear in policy, because I don't know if I'm hearing that's consistently happening across the division around it. In fact, I'm hearing from some staff that they feel like they have to give reassessments no matter what, without being able to, and it sounds like some schools are requiring 2 weeks. And I just want to piggyback, as someone who's taught college classes and does it full time, this is a growing problem amongst our college students across the board in terms of being able to finish assignments on time, read, follow instructions, all of these, I know we call them soft skills or POG skills, and it's also in the workplace, the biggest things that employers are complaining about. So this stuff is important, and it's important that we put requirements in while allowing reassessments that incentivize students to demonstrate these skills also. Whether we assess them or not, I know that's a difficult thing, but we don't want to disincentivize showing some of these executive functioning skills or learning these executive functioning skills. So I would recommend 100% reassessments with guidance that students must show reasonable attempts and efforts to learn in between before being allowed reassessments, and that schools may time down the reassessments, or perhaps we discuss that as division, but that's my recommendation.
Okay, so to summarize, I think that everyone's in agreement, it sounds like, to allow reassessment up to 100%. But I think we also want determined, did I hear one attempt up to 100% on a reassessment? I think it's per assessment. So if
Are you
I
asking-
assess you on, I mean, otherwise, I mean, we need to ask staff, because it's in the stipulation now. So what does it mean for one attempt
Per summative task.
per summative task?
And how do teachers like that? What's the data on number of kids taking retakes and the workload on teachers, and what would be a reasonable time limit to put? And maybe we don't need to discuss that, but at the same time, like, it does inform what we put in the policy, because if we leave it too open, then maybe now teachers are doing 100 reassessments every week, or.
And I didn't finish, so it was like up to 100%, one attempt, time-bound. Like, these are what I think we want details, like, we want it explicit, and then what does a reasonable attempt look like? Is that what I heard? I think that's what excuse me? I think I heard folks want a clearer definition on what a reasonable attempt is. That's what I heard board members share, I thought. Okay, so Rachna shared that, then, so can we, for other folks, then a reasonable attempt is okay to be determined by the teacher? Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr.
Well, I
Presidio.
was just going to suggest maybe, and again, I mean, however you want to go, but in the interest of time, I can work with the team to develop what some of those additional guidelines would be around the 100% retake, and provide that in draft before the next meeting, and you all could look at that and give us some feedback, and if you wanted revisions before the next meeting, we could work on revisions before the next meeting. But I think we're hearing, because I also heard what Ms. Lady heard about the reasonable attempt, because some teachers have said students aren't really studying for the first attempt, they're using it as like a practice test. We don't really want that to happen. We don't want to incentivize them to do a retake, right? So we've got to define that better, as well as putting some other guidelines in place. So we could take a shot at having a first draft of some guidelines around the 100% retake policy.
Right, and I will also take a stab at just saying that.
Or not, we don't have to do that, I was just offering.
No, I personally like that idea. But I would also say that I think there are a lot of our kids who don't do reassessments. And so our dutiful kids, our kids who have better executive functioning, quite frankly, tend to be the ones who take advantage of this opportunity. That's just been my experience in talking with teachers, right? Like, it's there for equitable grading access and for all kids. But in many situations, it's hard to, and again, even when they're mandatory, it's hard to get kids, some kids can't, they're just not as motivated, right, or interested. So I would love some guidelines. I mean, we can certainly review them. Ms. Marin.
Well, I think too, taking it to what when we look at the macro level, I mean, some of our kids don't have the resources of time or investment or a parent at home that can help them study for a retake. So are we just, once again, leaning towards one set of students who have means? I see what you're saying, Ms. Clemenco, about, you can't just have students reassess to that point, but like, what is the solution? Is it then, okay, you only get to retake one assessment a year, and I am pulling up other school divisions' policies and to look at, and I'll share those, but I mean, the policies range the gamut. There's some that are 2 pages, there's some that are 8 pages, but, so I don't know, I do hope that before we leave today, we can get clear on any directives to the superintendent and ourselves to bring back. If it's helpful to have staff draft up the 100 and see what it looks like, and that can inform our policy language, that sounds great. But it sounds like reassessment needs to be consistent. There's agreement on that.
Yeah, I think there's agreement, it needs to be consistent, it needs to be time-bound, and I think there's agreement on one attempt. At least that's what I thought I heard. Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. One of the things that I want to be careful in this conversation is to really paint inaccurate pictures regarding the students who are availing themselves of reassessments or not availing themselves of reassessments, what their first efforts could look like. We don't really know that kind of information, and I would not want for us to be inaccurate in what we are discussing here. I'm concerned about what that first attempt could look like, because that kid could have studied for 2 weeks and had a 20. Is that what tells the teacher it's not a good attempt because she doesn't know what was happening at home? They just bombed it. Maybe their dog died that day. Maybe, there was something going on with the family. But yet that kid was being diligent up until that test. Would the teacher say, well, that wasn't a reasonable attempt, and so you're not able to reassess? I'm a little concerned about where we could land on this. So I'd like to really challenge us to think a little bit more broadly in terms of who are our kids. They span the full continuum. There's a lot going on in their lives, and I would not want us to penalize certain students over others because we don't understand their circumstances. And so I just want to be sure we stay in that mode in these conversations, because we don't know who these kids are and what is happening in each of their homes. We have a small picture of what's happening with maybe your neighbor's child or your own children or the 2-3 people who emailed us. But we are making decisions that are going to impact, 100,000 kids potentially. So I want to be sure that we're being as generous to that population as possible in these discussions.
Thank you for that. Ms. Dixit.
So, going with Dr. Anderson, I don't know, I where's my camera? Okay. What Dr. Anderson just said, I believe the students who are not sometimes speaking for themselves, and whatever the reason is, I think it should be consistent a little bit there also, that any students who's got less than 50% in a test, there should be at least reach out, like a teacher asking, hey, you want to take a reassessment or something like that. That way the student can say yes or no. Some student won't do it. I have 2 boys. One of my son will just be like, I'm good. So, right. So, and the other will really study and take that opportunity. So that way we can be a little bit more equitable, because like you said, there's a parent teaching them at home, and one student has to do it all on their own, and nobody is watching their grades at home also. So maybe that could be helpful for a teacher to say, hey, you want to take a reassessment? I think you could do better if you study a bit more. And I was just chatting with my son, and he said there used to be like when they take a retake, they had to write all the answers of the previous test and tell them where they went wrong, and where they missed the point. So it was not just like, it's a lot of hard work goes into the retakes as well, from what I understand. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't know if we need to be as prescriptive saying one retake or not one retake to Ms. Anderson, or Dr. Anderson's point. I just think we need to put some guiding principles around requiring additional effort, such as what Ms. Dixit just talked about redoing the test or but I don't think we should describe what that additional effort is. That to me is operational. I just think when we're saying 100% retakes, we need to require some additional guidance around when those are allowed, time bound, additional effort, things like that. That's all.
Thank you. And I just want to uplift our teachers at the moment, because I don't know of a teacher who doesn't reach out to a child who's not succeeding. It doesn't mean that they can get that child to come in and retake a test, but it's been my experience in every school I worked in Fairfax County that teachers will do anything in their power to help get their students present in class, helping them learn what they need to learn or reteaching it and helping them be reassessed if that's an opportunity. So I just want to uplift our teachers. So in terms of reassessment, are we okay with asking staff to come back with some guidelines? Can we have staff do the same thing around gradebook type? Ms. Marin?
Well, I just have a question because, again, I thought we were going to ask staff so that it could help us decide the policy, right? So I'd want to be really clear about, like, so are they going to draft the policy language or they're just going to come up with the guidelines that we could further get to that policy language? And I don't think we were there yet with the first topic, with the grade book.
Well, it seemed to me, and again, this is the committee, which, we're going to bring forward a draft to the board. It seemed to me that the committee was most interested in the same grade book across disciplines throughout the system. Not by school, but not every discipline. And also there was a request for 4 core to be the same. So I think that if that were policy, then I think you can bring back how you would operationalize that or what guidelines might be created around that. And then I think when it came to reassessment, what I heard was up to 100%, and it has to be tight, if you will, for consistency across the system. And so is that 1 attempt? Is that 2 attempts? Personally, based on teacher time, based on the fact there's new material being introduced, I'm an advocate for 1 attempt for reassessment. And I thought I did hear that from folks. And how is that time bound? And to, Dr. Anderson's point, I do believe teachers are good. I believe they should be allowed to determine what an attempt looked like because they know their kids. They can look at a test where a kid may have gotten a 22%, but see what those responses were, and maybe they're not that far off, right? But they also know how engaged and available to learning that kid is during the day. A lot of our teachers know a lot about their kids, so I'm comfortable with the reasonable intent living within a teacher space. But maybe perhaps bring guidelines with that being the case, or maybe something that's more rigid as well. So we have 10 minutes left. Do we want to start to talk about gradebook weighting? Yes. This gradebook weighting, should that be in the policy? I think it's little.
I think it's little, and here it goes. I do think that we need to have language that says weighting must be consistent across the entire division. That's 1. Easy lift, because we're kind of there. 2, I think we need to have some general language that speaks to that the summatives, which is why we need those definitions, should have greater weight than the formatives, which are, your check-ins and your quizzes. What that is, I think that may be a different discussion, but minimally, these are the 2 points that I would like to see there. I would want to have some guardrails against having the summatives be 90-10 in the way that we had it in some of our schools. I think that's just a very difficult balance. I don't think that's really balanced. I do agree with what the committee has recommended with the 70-30. I think that's reasonable. And I know we all are looking for the research that speaks to that. And there's no research that speaks to specific weights. It's just what makes sense for us as a division. But this cannot be an individual teacher or school plan. It has to be across the whole division.
So may I ask a question? Across the entire division, the same, or if we were to go with a grade book, the grade book had to be the same across the division by discipline, could those weights be within that same category, or are you asking for the whole system to be the same?
I think I'm asking for the whole system
Okay,
to be
just
the
wanted to be
same,
clear.
because we also have that right now. Everybody's everywhere with the rolling grade book, quarterly grade books, and everybody's 70-30. Because I heard that in all of my high school classes 2 weeks ago, and all of the middle school classes.
Thank you. Anyone else on grade book weighting? Ms. Marin?
Well, again, my question before was, isn't this what the summative informative is really about, and the standards-based grading? I mean, this is a conversation, like, does the grading inform the instruction, or does the instruction inform the grading? If it's always continuously looping, then isn't it getting better? But this is a little more detailed than I really understand, so,
I think the question we're pondering is, should there be something in the policy about grade weighting?
I'll go for consistency over anything, even if we just have to state it, even if it's obvious, so it's known. It can't be left to the teacher level. I also just want to say, I agree that our staff does amazing things, but, we hear stories all the time of our staff being burnt out, and the expectation that just to be a teacher, you have to be so above and beyond doing all these things. I don't want to create systems that set them up for that, and then we know that we have large class sizes. We know that some teachers don't, even though they want to. I mean, look at middle school. The kids are in and out in 2 years. So I am hard pressed to think that a teacher, can get to know all of their kids well enough to know how they did on a test in 1 year in some of those middle school courses. So it's a lot. I want to be as objective as we can, because we can all find a story that supports our position, because there's 183,000 students, and those are all individual experiences.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser or Ms. Dixit, any comments on gradebook weighting?
I think Rachna has left, but I could just say that I agree that it should be consistent. I do like the idea of waiting because it just supports a lot of students who are working hard and taking those courses. But yeah, there's inconsistencies, it's just a difficult topic. So I've also wanted to give it a more thought before I say more. But consistency is definitely my preference too.
Okay, so I will take my turn and say that, yes, I think we need consistency, but I personally would not put in policy anything related to 70 or 30 or anything related to, things like that. I think consistency certainly across disciplines, but, I think it's been operationalized this year to try to see how everyone does with something consistent, and a lot of people balked at that at first, but I think that all of our teachers are making it work. I think that the benefit of formative, even in standards-based environments, is parents are getting to see how students are doing on formative, because those grades are actually being posted in grade books, so they're not waiting just for summative assessment. So I think that's going well. So 5 minutes. Do we tackle another one? Sure. We can recap and talk about, although number of assignments was the next one, I'll just put it out there. I don't think that belongs in a policy. Does anyone disagree? Dr. Anderson?
I was waiting for you to call me. No, I don't disagree, but I also, again, just to set context, whatever policies we're putting together for staff to put into practice, we also have to keep in mind it's going to happen with our most excited teachers, our most tired teachers, our teacher trainees who don't have the expertise that we would want for them to have, long-term substitutes. So there's a lot we shouldn't leave up to chance, because we have the gamut in our schools. So I want to be sure that's out there. I think we've had similar conversations when it comes to instruction, like the reading basal, where we're just offering that consistency across, no matter who's in the classroom. I approach grading and reporting of that grading in the same vein. And you'll always have your folks who go above and beyond. I mean, that's just the reality. But I do agree with you. I do not think our policy needs to state the number of assignments.
Okay, I think we're in agreement on that. So in terms of summary, Ms. Dixit.
So I agree with both of you about this, but I do want to say that, again, I want some consistency here as well, whereas some schools offer more assignments and some don't, and it could be a little bit more equitable. I believe that's kind of where my thought is, and again, not a specific number on my mind, because if I it was up to me, I would say more, but so I'm not saying anything. So I guess I believe in assignments. So, but it's up to the teachers, up to the schools. But here, I just thought that consistency across the division is also important. Thank you.
Okay, so in summary, what I'm hearing is consistency. I think we heard in terms of grade book, consistently cross-discipline throughout the secondary level in terms of what type of grade book they're going to use, and requested for Gore have the same. That would be policy, and then I guess how that would be operationalized or some guidelines around that. We talked about reassessment. Again, same thing with consistency. Up to 100%, perhaps one attempt, 2 weeks, reasonable attempt. In terms of, I think, gradebook weighting, and I think that number of assignments are probably similar, and they could probably be in a similar bullet within policy that just simply is a directive of consistency, but not operationalizing that, not operationalizing with any numbers. I think that's what I'm hearing from board members. And so I think for next steps, I think it would be helpful if you haven't. So the ones we have yet to cover are, if I can find my agenda. Would be letter versus percentage grades and use of zeros. I think are the two that we'll talk about, and I believe it's next Tuesday. I will be virtual from California and do my best to try to run an effective meeting. And then I think also we'd be well-served to look at some other policies. I know Melanie has shared some sites for that. Can I ask of board members, is there anything else you suggest that we do in preparation for next week?
Is there any way that we could start to put some structure to the actual policy that we could ask? I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think there was general consensus to do something with the guiding principles that already lived in the secondary report, to maybe start to flesh that out in some way so that it could live in a policy, and just to carve out some definitions. Happy to send the ones that I've been listing that we need to define. And also Loudoun Counties, I think, has a bunch of the definitions that make sense and were in alignment with what I was thinking. And we'll have to kind of wrestle with the beliefs section. And if there's any way for us to see of the other three policies, what we can drag over to this one, just to combine and reduce, perhaps that could be something staff takes a look at.
Staff or us? Because I think we all are in agreement, it sounds like, that we like the guiding principles. So perhaps under purpose, the guiding principles could be bulleted.
They're a little bit different. I think those guiding
Then just
principles,
list
I
them at-
think, are like more of a philosophy rather than the purpose of
Okay.
the document, of the policy itself.
So then they would
which
be
is what purpose you
separated as
I
their
know.
own, okay. Because I'm happy to add these things into what I already have, or I'm happy to let somebody else take a stab at it and I can email this to folks, or we can start from scratch.
I would love it if you emailed it to me, because I started to just put something.
Yeah, I'm happy to share with folks, and maybe that's something, if people want to do that and take a stab at language, and then we can share it.
Would it be possible to put this in a Google Drive?
Yes, Wendy can do that for us. We can put it in a Google Drive. However, I guess my thinking is, I want people to be comfortable thinking independently around this work. And so, I can look at it both ways. It can be a total collaborative project, or we could all kind of take what we got out of today, what we think we heard from our colleagues, and then try to, beef this up, and then share it with one another. But I would like to share the documents so we can take a look at them as like homework, perhaps before we come in next Tuesday.
Will it be graded?
Yes, it will be graded. There's no reassessment either. No, it will be, there are plenty of reassessments till we get it right. So, okay, are we kind of okay and clear on some direction?
Would you repeat it once more, please?
Okay. I think what we're going to do is I'm going to share the draft that I created, and then folks are going to take from their own notes today around our discussion. And if, someone, I could possibly send out what I have as a summary, but I've reiterated, I think, several times, and then add in the things that are not in here, like the guiding principles, like gradebook type, like reassessment. It's in here, but with more detail. And then the gradebook weighting and number of assignments just be more or less a directive around it being consistent across disciplines across the system. And then next week, we'll talk about the zero, and we'll talk about letter versus percentage grades. Good? Okay. Thank you, staff. We're adjourned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.